Gents, focusing now on the international break. Premier League action is done for a little while. The US national team are in action against Wales and, of course, Panama in Austria in 2 friendly games. It's the first time a lot of these guys are playing in 2020 due to the pandemic. Most of the players are European-based. And this is a really exciting opportunity to see the players that could be playing for the US at the Olympics next summer in Tokyo. Greg Berhalter, the US coach, has ended a very young team. 21 years and 300 days is the average age of this squad. So many teenagers, so many players. I believe it's 10 players who are looking for their first US national team cap. And he said 19 of this squad is eligible to play at the Olympics. So just a reminder, the Olympics, you have to be born on or after the 1st of January 1997. So it's actually been extended by a year due to the Olympics being pushed back a year due to the pandemic. So it's an under 24 tournament now instead of an under 23 tournament. And you can have a maximum of 3 overage players. So I'm looking at these players this week, and I really want to see who's going to take their chance, because there's no doubt that there's 7 or 8 guys here who wouldn't usually be on this US national team roster, but they've been fast-tracked due to the fact that they are in Europe playing for some big teams, either off the bench or for their reserve squads. I'm looking, Nick, like, who are the top picks here for the US Olympic team? But let's not forget, they have to qualify first. We're maybe getting ahead of ourselves slightly, but it looks like, they could have a pretty good run at qualifying, which we think is going to be around March in 2021. That hasn't been confirmed yet. But which players do you think are going to elevate themselves towards this Olympic side?
Well, when it started, it was about watching the center back play. We've covered that a lot when we talk about the United States men's national team and wanting to see Chris Richards. I thought we'd see Cameron Carter-Vickers, who is still just 22. We're not. But as soon as Josh Sargent wasn't released by Werder Bremen, my thought was, well, what are they going to do at center forward? And when we were on the conference call yesterday with Greg Berhalter, he pointed that out. He basically said, whether it's Tim Weah or Sebastian Soto, Conrad de la Fuente playing with a false 9, this is an opportunity those guys weren't going to have, at least against Wales. It was going to be Josh Sargent's position to lose. And we look back at the guys who were left behind, so to speak. Josie Altidore is getting quite older, hasn't been healthy in ages. So I'm going to be looking at the goal scorers here. I think this is a massive opportunity for them. And if you read between the lines, Greg Berhalter essentially said, we like a lot of our MLS guys, and not even essentially, literally said, don't forget about our veterans. This is on the young players to prove they should keep the guys who aren't here out. So lots to watch, and some of these guys are going to be one and done.
Andy, I mean, we have to remember as well that the top US players who are eligible for this Olympic team, Pulisic, Gio Reyna, Weston McKennie, Tyler Adams, it's difficult to see them actually being released for this tournament, given the fact that teams in Europe are reluctant to let some of their best players go at a very crucial part at the start of the season. So with that in mind, what do you expect? Do you expect to see some of the bigger players maybe making a push and saying, I want to represent the US at the Olympics? Because obviously for a long, long time now, Team USA hasn't been there from a men's soccer perspective.
Yeah, I would think that given the situation of this year and just how the seasons are going to work out from this season to next season and the calendar and everything, and having it condensed this time around. And by the way, who also knows what's going to happen over the next 6 to 8 months between the point where we think that we're going to be, putting this team together for a potential Olympics run. So the season could change again. I would guess that probably under some heavy advisement from their clubs and maybe even some personal representatives, a lot of these players will probably look at it and say, it would be great to play in the Olympics, but I'm going to have an opportunity in the future as an overage player that I could potentially kind of tick that box off the list down the road. And maybe this just isn't the best time. And so it opens the door a little bit more for some of those other players. And one name that I'm very excited to see, and he's not in this team because he plays in MLS, and he's also currently recovering from a fairly lengthy injury at the moment, but it's Paxton Pomykal, a central midfielder, a playmaker, the type of player that the U.S. has not had in a long, long time. Pretty good going both ways, but really, really good, operating as almost a true number 10. And that's the point there is Gio Reyna, Christian Pulisic, very, very solid players, not true number 10s, not true playmakers from the midfield. They will get you goals. Pomykal will create the goals for everyone else. And so I think if he can kind of, one, obviously get back from his injury and get himself healthy and into that Olympic team mix, then he might just end up being the star, like the star of that entire team. And at that point, we'll be fast tracking him towards the 2022 World Cup team.
Absolutely. And of course, there's a lot of these players now, they played together at tournaments throughout the youth national team setup. A lot of these players who we'll see against Wales and Panama played at the U20 World Cups, had some success in the youth team ranks. So that to me is exciting as well. These players have all kind of come through at the same time. A lot of them now have been pushed, due to circumstances that we all know about, into the national team setup together. But that should probably help the likes of Dest, De La Fuente, Richards kind of settle in and look around and see players around them that they know what they can expect from.
Yeah, and can we also give Greg Berhalter a little bit of credit as well, because he has been very thorough with how he has gone through eligible players that either are in the player pool or could potentially be in the player pool. And that's something that wasn't happening for a while. Just the kind of breakdown in communication between the technical staff at US Soccer and players all over the world, the relationships that they were maintaining or not maintaining in some instances with these players, bringing in 2 or 3 players that, all due respect, a lot of people had never heard of before they popped up on the roster last week, is a pretty good indicator, I would think, that Berhalter and his staff are scouring and scouting and seeing and maintaining every single relationship that they need to continue to build this player pool out.
And one point I want to make is that with the schedule being changed to 2021, the tournament in Tokyo is actually in late July, early August. If the US did make it to the final and made it at all, it is, maybe in previous Olympic years, it's been difficult. It's been later on, September, that kind of time where this tournament's taken place. So that could actually work in the favor for a lot of these US players that, hey, like if I'm Pulisic, I'm speaking to Frank Lampard and saying, look, I'll be back right at the end of preseason, but I really want to do this. I have a huge connection, obviously, with the national team, and this is a huge deal. And I feel like a lot of these players, Adams, McKennie, they've come together through the ranks, and this would be something special, especially the fact that they missed out on going to the 2018 World Cup together. So Nick, you got a final point on this roster and what it could look like?
Yeah, I was just going to say, as a counterpoint to kind of what Andy said, which makes a heck of a lot of sense, don't forget 2 things. One, we've seen teams angle to grow their mark in the United States market. So that might be a little bit of a, you know what, go ahead. We also saw player power rear its head at the last Olympics. Granted, it was on home soil, but Neymar was like, listen, I want to be there. So we will see right now the desires of those U.S. players. That's a big deal. Also, one last point. It was often at the U20 World Cup, and that was a good team in the friendlies beforehand. They played France. They beat France in the tournament. They tied them in a friendly beforehand. It was often a 4-3-3. That would work well for this midfield. And a top was often Weah, Soto, De La Fuente. They could do that, at least against Panama. So the familiarity is there, and let's credit the program for that for sure.
And one quick drop in, Conrad De La Fuente with Ansu Fati out for months and months and months now. Mm-hmm. Who knows? There will be minutes off the bench at first, and then he can prove what he can do with that team. He's been just on the periphery of that Barcelona team for the majority of this season. So potentially an opportunity for him to start to make his way at that club and break out.
Another young US player making his way at a European giant. There's so many, isn't there, when you look around now, so many different countries and players moving through. I want to finish with saying this would be, in a perfect world, if all the players got released, this would be my starting lineup for the US at the Olympics next summer. All right. So I'm going with Zach Steffen in goal. I think overage player, his situation at Man City is probably not going to be needed there. You've got Adunzi who's in this squad. Obviously, he could step in as well in the youth national teams. But I'm going to go Steffen in goal, Dest at right back, Chris Richards at centre back. I'm going to go with Brooks as another overage centre back and it could be Ream, it could be someone else. It's kind of, I think that's an area where you probably need a bit of experience with a lot of these defenders. Anthony Robinson at left back. In central midfield, McKennie and Adams, of course. And again, of course, if they get released. And then the midfield attacking 3 of Pulisic, Reina, and Musa. I mean, I haven't seen Musa in a US national team shirt yet, but from what we've seen with Valencia, he obviously clearly has talent and has produced for the English national youth teams for a long time now. So if he selects the US long term, I'd expect to see him in that squad. And then Josh Sargent up top, I think, again, he's kind of just ahead of Soto and these other, even Weyer obviously usually plays out wide, but can play centrally. I think he's the kind of standout candidate. But then you mentioned it before, Nick. I mean, Johansson maybe coming in as an overage player, Brad Guzan, Will Trapp. There's a way you can flesh out that squad there to give them that experience. But there's a lot of great young talent there. I'm really looking forward to seeing how they play first against Wales and then against Panama in this international break. So, yeah, let's all aboard the Stars and Stripes bandwagon. I'm sure we'll be all focused on winning the World Cup in 2026. But between now and then, there's going to be a lot of fun to be had with these young players.